Greetings, humans. Richard here. I'm going to share with you today a conversation I actually recorded maybe a month ago with a fellow called Seth Bush. And Seth is in Pennsylvania, I think, it's somewhere in the States. And he's doing a lot of local neighborhood organizing. And from the conversation, I get the impression that, yeah, they're doing some really cool stuff at the hyper local scale. They're creating a lot of social capital, social fabric, doing mutual aid and stuff. It sounds really cool. So we talked about, what he's up to. We talked about legal structures, like they're wanting to have some collective finances and what's the appropriate structure to put that in. We talked about scaling or replicating, like how to grow from one super local neighborhood to many neighborhoods, because obviously there's lots of neighborhoods that would like to be better connected. We also touched a little bit on some of my perspective, I guess, on how the priorities and the approach within Microsolidarity is just a little different from the main currents that you see in contemporary social justice movements, like kind of carefully exploring like why does Microsolidarity do things a bit different than a lot of social justice spaces do. And then at the end of the conversation, we kind of switched roles and Seth gave me some really good advice about how I can be a better coach. So that was really a nice place to end it on. Incidentally, Seth is a friend, well, we're mutual friends of Jonas Gröner, who's someone that I talked with on a previous episode. I'll add the link. Jonas is really rad. He's another community organizer and coach. Follow up with Jonas as well. He's doing climate activism in Austria, I think. I'm probably getting people confused now. But anyway, maybe the last thing to say is on this conversation, we mentioned the Microsolidarity Gathering coming up in Denver. That's now sold out. There's no more spaces, but we will be in Denver for like the first week of November. So if you're around that area and you want to hang out, just drop a comment. Okay, I'll let the video roll. Thanks for watching. So connection, maybe you can start by telling me, how do you know Jonas? And then we'll go from there.
Yeah. We both have trained with the Academy for Coaching Excellence based in Sacramento, California. That's the coach training program that we've been through. And I've never met Jonas, but we have a really alive and vibrant Slack community of coaches. It's like one of the best parts of having gone through this school is this like community of people who are continuously mutually supporting one another. And one day Jonas posted, I think he actually posted his reflections from the Microsolidarity Gathering. Was it in Germany or Belgium? Belgium. And he just shared it out with the group, and I was like, I hadn't really even connected with him yet, but I read his take on the Microsolidarity Gathering, and then I was like, I need to talk to Jonas. So we talked and hit it off and just grooved for a while, and he said, you need to talk to Rich. So we were just grooving on some of the work that we were each doing in our own places and how we were bringing our coaching skill sets into it, and it was just very, very alive. So that's how we connected.
Cool. I will now or later like to know how I can be a better coach, because I do some coaching but with no training of any kind, and I'm really going by feel, and that's okay, but I know I could do a lot better.
Yes, I have lots of ideas about that.
Great. You said that reading the Microsolidarity stuff helped give you language for what you already knew. I feel like I'm in that stage of like, I do okay, but I just need someone to help crystallize what I already know and give me some pointers to where the gaps are.
Yep. And to have like a really tangible, I'd say toolkit, set of practices, and synthesized way of being coach with people. It's so powerful to go through a training experience. There's so many different routes you can go. I like mine, but I can also vouch for several others. So happy to share about that for sure.
Cool. Maybe it's more interesting for now though to talk about the local community stuff, and maybe the coaching fits in at the end of that. But tell me about that.
Yeah, we so my background, and actually what got me into coaching to begin with was I was been like community organizing, grassroots organizing. So I started organizing in college and doing community work in college, specifically around climate and the climate crisis and sustainability, and ended up working for the Sierra Club for a number of years in the city of Baltimore and a little bit here in Pittsburgh area as well, Pennsylvania. But that kind of like programming of, okay, this is how to do community organizing, here's how to motivate people, here's how to empower people, here's how to build power towards an outcome that you want, mixed with the coaching mindset of seeing everybody as having goals and dreams and a desire to make a difference, and having their own answers. And I think really having I really believe, and I've learned this through coaching, that everybody wants to make a contribution where they are.
Yeah.
And then I bought a house in, I had been living in rentals in various communities around, but then I bought a house in this borough right outside of the city of Pittsburgh. The borough is called Swissvale. And then the pandemic happened about a year or two after that. And I saw, wow, I'm not connected with my neighbors. Like, here's this really intense thing that's happening. And I feel like I'm having my needs met, thank goodness, but I'm definitely seeing some neighbors around me who aren't. And I don't feel a sense of connection to have conversations and the skills to work together to figure out how do we meet those. Mm-hmm. And I did some mutual aid projects in Pittsburgh broadly, but never really felt super connected where I am. And I started sharing this with my buddy Andrew, and he turned me on to this idea of municipalism. Have you heard the book Fearless Cities?
Yeah, I went to a couple of the conferences.
Oh, awesome. So we both read Fearless Cities together. We actually just did a book study of it in our area with some more folks very recently. But we really latched onto this idea of, okay, how do we cultivate a sense of dual power in our area? Because our local elected officials are good people. Like, I've worked to help get them elected. They're really wonderful. They just have zero resources. And people just tend to complain about, why aren't you doing more, borough council? And so we said, well, let's see what we can do to actually cultivate a sense that we are the borough, and we have the power to actually help each other meet our needs here where we are. And at the time, Andrew was living across the street from me. So we latched onto this idea of, there's a lot of vacant lots. There's a lot of land in our community. We live in our borough is pretty diverse, and then our street is like the most diverse of the borough, I would say, in terms of race and economic background and age and ability and et cetera. And part of the challenge is we have a lot of vacant houses, falling down houses, blighted land, unused land. So we went door to door with a survey and said, hey, we know everybody in the neighborhood sees this. I'm your neighbor. We've never talked. I want to know you better. And hey, we're doing this thing around vacant land to better understand, what do people want to see happen here? And so we did this survey. Big takeaway was we got a lot of takeaways and a lot of interests: dog park, growing food, play spaces. Person after person saying, we just don't want to see litter in the lots or on the streets, right? So we started doing litter pickups as a way to bring people together. And that has actually formed into, I would say, our first crew, to use the Microsolidarity language. Is now we have a crew of, I think there's 4 of us who every month we get together and we organize a litter pickup on the street. And it's super easy. We know what we're doing. And from there, we said, well, let's bring more people together. And so we had a gathering that was a visioning session of, Andrew and I did a lot of research. What are the lots that we think we could easily get our hands on? Like, we did a scale of lots that we think we could have easy access to and nobody would care if we did something on it. Lots that we think would be good to do something on, but we would probably need permission. And then lots that are unlikely that we're going to be able to, anything's going to fly. And so we did this whole visioning process thinking like 8 people would come. And I think over 2 meetings, we had 25, 30 people in the neighborhood come. And it was just this incredibly empowering, exciting experience. And then from that, we launched at least one more really active crew that's focused on a community garden, and then a couple more that are kind of like nascent, that have really cool ideas but haven't yet gotten the like juice to form and to gel and start moving. And again, we were doing all of this before I even found Microsolidarity. And then I found Microsolidarity. I was like, oh, we're already organizing in groups of like 3 to 5 and coming together in larger, congregations every so often. And we had a cookout back in May because that was one of the things that came out of our visioning session. People said, wow, we used to have cookouts on the street. And we said, great, let's do a cookout. And so we did that and used that as a way to gel more people into working together. So that's really what it's looked like. And the underlying purpose is, yes, we want to do something with vacant lots, but more importantly, we want people to have a sense of belonging and a sense of community and a sense of, I know my neighbors and I know how to work with my neighbors. I've had a breakthrough for myself recently around, I've put so much energy into climate activism, which is still near and dear to my heart and really, really important to me. And that's like what my organizing has been for pretty much exclusively, and my coaching has largely been around coaching leaders for social justice and climate action. So elected officials, campaign managers, people at Sierra Club, Greenpeace, all over the place. And as I've done that work, I've really seen, oh, we need to be better equipped at the hyper local, like block by block level to actually work together if we're ever going to implement any of these climate solutions. Like we just need to be able to work together and take good care of each other, both for implementing the solutions that will hopefully mitigate the climate crisis, but also to implement solutions that will need to adapt to the unexpected challenges that come, right? So to me, that's like the underlying, okay, let's find some vector for organizing where we live, and vacant lots are what we've latched onto. My buddy Andrew just moved up the hill and vacant lots are not an issue there. So now they're talking about, but they have a lot of gardeners. So they're using composting as a vector to bring people together and start talking about how can we, just like whatever we can do to start practicing working together. So that's the organizing in a nutshell. We have our next gathering is coming up on September 18th, where we're doing like a cleanup day of the lot, where we're hoping to turn it into a community garden. Cleanup day and community visioning session for turning it into a community garden. So yeah, that's what's been happening locally, and we have some visions and dreams of starting a nonprofit so that we can start to channel some funds and money towards these projects in a way that's not just landing in our personal bank accounts, and also do some more robust mutual aid work, such that we're able to actually like essentially have a bank account that we can use to channel money to people who need it. But also to scale, because we've had success with like a set of blocks on one part of our borough of 8,000 people. So maybe like max 30 to 50 people have been actively engaged at one point or another. But there are other areas of our borough that are wanting to do something similar. They see what we're up to and say, we want this. And so we're starting to talk to them about, well, this is what we've done. We're no experts, but like, this is how we've done it so far. And maybe we could someday have a network of these like pods, or we've sometimes been calling them neighborhood assemblies in the sense of fearless cities, neighborhood assemblies. How can we network those together to share resources together? So I'll pause there, but that's I get really cool. Excited about it.
Yeah, no, me too. It's cool. It's really it sounds like you're doing something that has a natural flow to it. So there's like momentum.
It's been very emergent. It's been very much like, we don't really know what we're doing. We think we're going to do this and this and this and see what happens.
I was talking to someone today and their metaphor was the mycelium. So it's like we have to have, if you have this underground invisible network of dense connections, then you can have the fruiting body of the mushrooms comes up. But if you don't have the network, then the fruit doesn't come, and you can try and make these fruits, but they fall over pretty quickly. And it doesn't really matter what the project is, so long as you're cultivating that network, the social fabric, the mycelial connections. So I guess one question I have is, in your perspective, like if you said something about like, we need to be better equipped for working together at the hyperlocal scale. Is it sufficient to bring people together, to pick up litter, to have a cookout, to do a Christmas party or whatever, like just keep smushing people together, and just trust that will create enough social capital, and the system kind of manages itself, and the resources start to flow, and the connections start to flow, and the positive feedback loops kick off from that? Or are you using a bit more of an intentional engineering approach of like, we need to equip people with skills that they lack, and therefore we don't just do litter pickup, we also do a training on communication skills, or like, where are you on that spectrum from like completely emergent, informal to a bit more, NGO activist strategy?
I would say it's a good question. The direction we want to be able to go is do more of that skill building. Thus the Fearless Cities book club that we started. We've been meeting, over a series of like, all right, let's do some political education together. I have a vision for us ultimately having, I think it'll look like on the crew scale of 3 to 5 people, but more likely, I feel like it will be closer to like 15 people at a time, representing a block of creating some neighborhood assemblies that are coming together on a regular basis. Maybe just on a time limited basis at first. Like let's bring some people together from the block for 3 months and try out coming together to talk about what are needs that we have in our own household or that we see in the community, and let's focus on those needs for 2 or 3 weeks at a time, right? But in that process, we're going to need to train people on how do you facilitate meetings? How do you do door-to-door outreach for events? And we've already done some of that, right? Doing some political education of how do we just like, actually, what are the nuts and bolts, as you said, of engineering and structuring a community? Ideally, we want a lot of people to hold those skills and not just a couple of us, so that the organic growth can happen and organic emergence can happen. Eventually, I imagine there being skills for fundraising and skills for, even especially as practical as gardening and doing work in terms of ecological restoration in our area. So I definitely see it being greater than some occasional parties and gatherings, although I would love for most of our gatherings to feel like parties. But I think in order to really be lasting and to make an impact, again, people want to make a contribution. So coming together for a party is fun, but if we don't have the vehicle for people to be working together on something concrete, then it's probably not going to stick and be lasting, because it's not actually going to meet people's needs. And in order to do that meeting of needs, then we need to do some skilling up. I feel grateful that I've gotten a lot of training, so I can do a lot of training of like, okay, how do we do this? But then we're going to need to bring a lot of people in from outside to do some of that too. So does that answer the question?
I noticed I've got a little fear, because you use the word scaling, and I've only spent 3 months in the US, but that was one of the words that freaked me out the most, because I kept meeting people that were doing something good, and then got into the project of scaling it, and I don't know how to say that. It's hard as an outsider, like to have this perspective and be respectful, but it felt like a lot of times the scale killed the magic. That this focus on that, just what comes along with scale as a frame is like efficiency, a kind of service delivery model, like a consumer model rather than a mutual aid model. And people kind of got distracted by, I think one of the struggles in the US is the states are not they don't have enough autonomy from each other. And so everyone's got to have this like really high stakes fight over the national level. But if there was more federation, if the federation was actually really strong, people could just be different and just be like, yeah, it's fine. You're just different to me. But but there's one president and the president's super powerful, so everyone's got to be like super upset about it. And so the same thing happens with scaling, that like you have to, as you reach more and more people, there's this, it seems like there's this pressure in the US, which I don't feel in Europe, to build unity. And that means you have to have these very painful conflicts and often factions and, you know, dramas and things happen. But yeah, like I say, that there's just something in that frame that seems to invite in all of these really challenging dynamics. And I'm like, is there a different frame that still is about growth and it's about reaching more people?
Yeah,
but just not that word.
I wonder.
So I'm like replicating, you know, and like you said, network, I think is another example.
Replicating might be replicating networking. Like, I'm not sure yet that I'm interested, like, even in creating an organization that's at the scale of our local borough of 8,000 people. Like, we're playing with that idea because some people have said, oh, we want what you're doing. And Andrew and I have said, like, oh my gosh, we love what we're doing. And it's taking a lot of energy. And we kind of wish we could leave our day jobs and just like do this and figure it out. So my point being, I'm most interested in seeing the scale work at that hyper local level of, I mean, somewhat selfishly, like, I want to be really well connected with my like next door neighbors and the people who live across the street from me and have a sense that we can take really good care of each other. And if it was like just that, I would be pretty darn happy. And if there's something about that that's working, I would love to help other people replicate it in a way that works for them without needing to have like a set of rules of this is how you have to do it, you know, or even me needing to like benefit off of it.
For me, like when you say that it's really working, that to me means it's not dependent on you personally overextending your energy budget. That actually there's an abundance of people on your street that can play the role that you're playing, and you take turns through the different seasons of your life.
Exactly.
And that if you can get that happening in one street and then support the neighboring street to do the same thing, then like replicate that by all means. But I'm like, don't replicate a thing where everyone's stretched, you know, and everyone's being instrumentalized.
No, that's the opposite of what I want. I mean, I think the sort of scale that I would love to see is, again, my friend Andrew was renting across the street, and then he just bought a house up the hill, which is in a distinctly different neighborhood of the borough with like different opportunities, different challenges, different people, right? And I would love to see, I know he would love to see some sense of, but also a similar challenge where he doesn't feel connected. And he's already noted that other people don't feel connected and that sense of like belonging. So he's trying to figure out uniquely up there, okay, how do we gel this up here? And then there comes a time when we're doing the community garden down here and we need some more hands, or somebody who's really skilled at, you know, somebody has like a stump mulcher, right, up the hill. All right, they can come down and help us out because they've built that capacity up the hill in whatever way is working for them, but we can be networked together so that they can come and help us out when we need it. And then when they need some help clearing bamboo because they have this epic overgrown stand of bamboo that's eating up people's yards, we can send a whole crew up from down the hill with machetes to go, you know, whack things up and have a big, you know, party afterwards, right? So having the like capacity and skills at working with each other on that hyper local level such that we have the abundance to then be able to share that with people who are our like neighboring neighborhoods. And that's the sort of scale that I would love to see happening. You know, maybe someday we get really good at that, however many years down the line, and there's another borough across Pittsburgh that's doing something similar and saying, hey, Swissvale, we have a big project. Can you send some of your people who have experience and practice doing this stuff over here and help us out with it, you know? yeah, I think that would be a, you know, and then eventually we figure out how we get direct democracy happening at the legislative level to support all of that, right? With like delegates from neighborhood councils to the local legislatures, et cetera. But
I'm just thinking about my own energy budget and mapping it across these you know, increasing circles of scale. So there's like my crew. The main one at the moment is the hum, which is our business, and that's, you know, 70% of my energy. And then there's a circle around that, which is called Inspiral, which is like my main home-based community. And I'm only really showing up in with some leadership energy at a scale of about 30 people.
right.
And I'm contributing a little bit, but I'm going to back off soon. You know, it's like, doesn't take that much. And then, so that maybe 20% of my energy. And then there's Microsolidarity, which is, you know, well, there's a few hundred people connected to a few hundred communities. And that's like 10% of my energy. So like as it reaches larger and larger scale, it's like, yeah, I've only got a tiny little contribution that I can make there. And all of my focus is on the bottom of the stack, and trying to cultivate as many people as possible. Like I said, that have replaceable skills, you know, that all of these people are active, and not that no one in that system is just a passive consumer. Because like my experience with social movements is the thing that we're lacking, like the way you described it about these skills of working together at the local scale, I describe it as like hosting capacity. That you know what it's like to have these intense, polarized, political, you know, very charged conflicts ripping through society. They need someone to host those conflicts in a peaceful, generative way. That means someone needs to have a lot of emotional reserves and intelligence to be able to invite people in and say, hey, there's difference here, let's look at it peacefully, you know, like let's grieve, let's celebrate, let's move on. And that's the missing piece in the increasingly polarized Western societies we live in. And so like for me, yeah, like picking up the garbage, it's one thing. It's like, but what about organizing the garbage picker-uppers? You know, do you know how to schedule a meeting? That's the baby step that gets, you know, to where we need to get to. And it's tempting to go like, oh, you've got a really great story here. And I can imagine in 2 years' time, you go and fundraise for this massive nationwide NGO, which has got this like neighborhood something, and it feels somehow like you're doing the right thing, but it completely misses the point of what's needed on the ground.
No, I'm much more interested in the litter picker uppers getting some skills, so that then they have an idea of something different. Like, I don't know, I want to go help people weatherize their houses in the neighborhood, and now I have the ability to do that because I participate in the litter pickups and got some organizing skill. We're this month, we're 1 year into the litter pickups, and just last month the first one happened without me really having much to do with it.
Awesome.
Like I wasn't there. I was in a completely different state. You know, I gelled the first meeting to bring people together, and then I was like, okay, go do it. And
that's awesome. That's
was
so crucial.
Successful, right?
I wonder if you can even write that into your ways of working somehow. You know, that's actually a maturity threshold, that the person who started something can leave and it keeps going. Then you know you've crossed some kind of threshold then. Where my curiosity was going next was, like I briefly mentioned, money, and you talked about a nonprofit, and I have thoughts about that, and I wondered what your thoughts are about that.
Our thoughts about it are very baby. They're very like nascent. Yeah, me and Andrew, my co-conspirator, were like, do we need an official entity? Is that a nonprofit? Is that a worker cooperative? I've learned that there's something called a nonprofit cooperative in the state of Pennsylvania, at least, and I don't even know what that is and what that actually means. So we're very much in a research phase of figuring out like how can we yeah, it's kind of new, but the vision for the nonprofit is how can we support people doing projects in their neighborhood and have in Swissvale, in our borough specifically. And one of the brainstorms we've had is like, what if we had a core of people who are actually getting paid to do some of the labor that's needed, like clearing vacant lots and planting food and weatherizing houses and, you know, cutting down invasive species and helping people with simple landscaping tasks, because a lot of people get really overgrown lots because their landlords are not taking care of them. And what if we had this core that was part volunteer of people who just were doing it from mutual aid, and then part people who are really skilled at doing these things, who are able to dedicate more time and energy to it because we pay them. And maybe that money comes from some combination of fee for service that is on a really accessible sliding scale, and some of it comes from the borough government because we're taking some work off their plate, and some of it comes from grants. And then we have this like crew of people who are really able to not just do manual labor, but also, I don't know, do some things like help facilitate meetings and share some of the skills and create like start to create cooperative economies. We've talked about 3 pillars that we're brainstorming of direct democracy. So facilitating, supporting people, training people, helping people really practice direct democracy. Ecosystem restoration. So how can we facilitate better connection with the land, and both ecosystem in terms of natural ecosystem and also human ecosystem. So that's where the piece of like really strong relationships and belonging and connection and capacity for working together comes in. But also doing projects that largely focus on how can we heal the land that we're on, and cooperative economy. So how can we start to shape local economies in Swissvale that are more like locally self-reliant, and using the like model of people working at the hyperlocal level together, getting support to form at a local level to start to gel and do these projects, and the nonprofit is channeling resources to do the projects that are necessary. And I don't know if a nonprofit is the way to do that. Maybe we can just do that without even ever needing to incorporate as anything. Yeah. Our like brainstorm so far is let's just make a nonprofit so we have it. And if the magical grant comes our way, we're ready to receive it, and have an advisory board of some neighbors that is helping like hold us accountable. And then just do what else we would normally do that seems to make sense without needing to like make a nonprofit, but yeah, we like have it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That sounds cool. I really like these 3 pillars as well. One thing I noted is Jonas just recently did an interview with this guy Pascal in the Netherlands, okay, who does local community organizing, and they started a bunch of companies around like landscaping and I think cool, alternative energy sources for houses, and you know that they kind of started in a very similar way to what you're describing, but then cool, supported people to actually start their own, you know, private companies. And I think in that, I don't know about this, but my understanding in that context was like I say, they're private companies, and it's not like they are explicitly funding the commons from those companies, but it's more like the social context is, you know, these are people we love in our community, and they're going to respond with generosity to the other needs that show up. So it'd be definitely, I'll get you the link for that podcast, please, but also get Jonas to introduce you to Pascal. Okay, he'll be great to talk to. What comes to mind for me is having started a few organizations. It's expensive in time and money, and I'm thinking the Microsolidarity way is always to do a small version first, and then to iterate and grow and expand from there. So do you know about fiscal hosting?
Fiscal hosting?
Yeah.
No.
This is basically like there is a nonprofit that exists, and they operate as your fiscal host. So they,
Yeah.
meaning they'll do a deal with you so that under certain terms, you can receive tax deductible donations. They'll take care of the accounting, that sort of thing.
I know it as fiscal sponsorship.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's a platform called Open Collective, and it's basically like a fiscal sponsor as a service. It's extremely easy to get set up. It's if you imagine Patreon, but instead of funding one single creator, it's funding a collective.
Yep.
So you can collect donations, one-off or repeated, and then you've got this money there in this like virtual bank account, and then you can spend that money. Either like you buy stuff and then get reimbursed, or you send invoices for services done. And everything's 100% transparent to the public. So it's a really like completely effortless to get set up, and gives you a shared bank account and a shared place where you can go, oh, look, we're building up resources here. So like in the Microsolidarity Global Network, I set one up and said, I just asked people, if you want to come to our monthly calls, can you contribute $3 a month? And then we can pay a facilitator. And people were super happy to do that. You know, it's a way to show some commitment, and it means we get to pay someone $100 a month to run a meeting, which feels good, you know? So I really super highly recommend Open Collective or something like it, like a really super easy step that you can get done in an afternoon and start playing with money. And then, you know, as that accumulates, then you have to have decisions about like, hey, who's actually, who's got decision-making say over how we spend this money, and like, how do we have smart checks and balances, and getting into that. I think it's useful to have the debates about an actual shared resource instead of doing a lot of work building an organization, anticipating there may be resources in the future. This is, I guess, a general rule for me, is like, it's much easier to navigate through the rear view mirror. So meaning reflecting on recent experiences rather than anticipating future scenarios and trying to simulate and predict what's going to happen. So start collecting the money today, and then tomorrow have the debates about how do we spend it.
Cool. I love that idea. You know, I really appreciate that framing, because I had thought about fiscal sponsorship, but I hadn't thought of it in the perspective of like, it's kind of like training wheels, because I know starting a nonprofit, I mean, I've started a separate business myself. Just the process of figuring out the bylaws and the operating agreement, it's like trying to predict the future. And we just don't have enough experience working together, not really much at all working with money, to be able to predict the future. And so it could be a lower pressure way to get going.
And you think you're trying to predict the future, but actually what you're doing is dealing with everyone's traumatized projections.
Right, exactly.
And much easier to do that if there's like a real object in the room and you can at least focus and scope it down a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I really appreciate that. Yeah. You know, that might even be a useful approach for me to take with my coaching work, you know, for my job. I've been thinking about what is a better structure for me to get donations to be able to support. You know, I imagine I've been doing a lot of work with people who then can get coaching paid for by their organizations. But as I'm working in communities where leaders are working on various projects, they probably don't have some, you know, multi-million-dollar nonprofit backing them up. And just the way that money's going to work to be able to pay for my services is going to be different. So how do I start receiving funding to be able to offer what I do pro bono or low bono, you know, in a really accessible way? So that fiscal sponsorship might be a good way to start. With that.
And I'm thinking, like, if there's 3 of you that are offering paid services under the umbrella of this collective, or 5 of you, do that first before you go and set up your own thing.
Right. Do you know of, so you mentioned Pascal. I'm really interested in connecting with anybody else who's like using Microsolidarity or something like it in the context of building community in an already established neighborhood, because I think there's a different set of challenges than online communities, right? And it's even different set of challenges than, say, Eco Village, where people are coming together and saying, hey, we're going to build this community from the ground up. It's more like, all right, we all bought houses next to each other. Some people have lived here for 60, 70 years. We don't necessarily have a lot of choice of who's here and how they think and what they're interested in, but nevertheless, we want to form community. How do we do that, right?
Yeah. Yeah. There's a few people, I think, I mean, we're going to have our first big network gathering in Denver in a couple of months. So that's where I really get a chance to be on the ground in the States and get to know people in a real deep way. But what I do know already in Denver, Drew Hornbein's there, and he's, if you go to sharedground.co is the website, they have taken over an abandoned church, and they're actually incorporating as a church too, as a kind of secular church, because there's some real benefits to doing things that way. Could be the right mode for you too. I mean,
sure,
it's an interesting one.
That is interesting.
But I mean, just jump into the Microsolidarity Discord, and there's a channel for Shared Ground Denver, and talk to Drew there. And he's
cool.
He's awesome. It's like a really great organizer.
Is there a link for that on the website to get hooked up to the Discord? All right, I can find it.
Yeah. And then there's another channel on there called Blivanda, and Blivanda is a Swedish word. I think it means becoming, which is nice because it's like you have the belonging and then you have the becoming being the like the developmental thing. They run a kind of creative arts co-working community center in Sweden. And that it's not quite the same. It's not neighborhood organizing, but it is very much place-based, you know, and they do have to deal with the municipality and those sorts of things. So yeah, I mean, my vision for the Discord is that it's a space where people in your role, first of all, you can just have a channel there and talk about what you're doing, but then you can just drop into other people's channels and say, hey, I've got questions about how you handled this question, you know? So
cool.
I really want that to be like an open switchboard kind of matchmaking thing. And yeah, I think my contacts on the ground in the US are a little bit weak. And I keep saying the US because I think the social context there is so distinct.
And that's what's really important to me. Yeah, it very much is.
Do you know the network called Building Belonging?
No.
Buildingbelonging.co as well, I think. I don't know if they're currently open. Check if they're open. They have periods where they take in a new cohort. They're all community organizers, and lots of them are familiar with Microsolidarity stuff. Some of them will be at the gathering. I'm just thinking I should get some of them into the Discord and have them open a channel as well. But there's a bunch of people on the ground there that are definitely doing this kind of stuff.
Cool.
So yeah, see if they're open, see if the door's open, and if it's not, I'll give you a personal introduction.
Cool. Is there still room at the gathering in Denver?
Yeah, there's like 5 seats left, I think. Okay. So
I've been on the fence because it's my cousin's wedding that weekend. And it's like, oh, here's this really cool opportunity to like stretch and be in a new community and my family, which is a really important community. So
yeah.
Anyway.
We're gonna be hanging around in Denver for the following week as well. So like if you miss the gathering but you can come later, there'll be kind of informal events and stuff happening. So cool. That's an option. And the church space, Shared Ground, we're hoping that becomes a kind of like local hub for Microsolidarity people in Denver. Cool. I don't know about Philadelphia, but you know, it depends who shows up.
Yeah, that would be really cool if some folks came from Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania, yeah.
Well, Philadelphia is the other major, is the major city in Pennsylvania, and Pittsburgh is the other one on the other side of the state that people forget about.
Gotcha.
But we're 5.5 hours driving apart, so it's like very, very different places.
Different countries in Europe.
Practically here too, to be honest. It's the accent, the language is different, everything. it's all English, but is it? Um, um, Along a similar lines, I'm also really looking for mentorship right now for someone who's like, or a crew of people who have had success building community in existing neighborhoods, ideally in those areas of like that are diverse regarding race and age and economic background. Any ideas that you have there for people who have like had success? And it sounds like probably the same people who you've already pointed me to is where to look. But
yes, it is. I would just jump into the Discord and open a question just in the main general channel. Just does anyone want to join me in this inquiry? And you may find some people. I think the building belonging community is actually going to be a bit closer to what you're looking for. Cool. Yeah, like you mentioned, racial diversity, for example. I think that's like that's a whole domain of expertise that I haven't got, and it hasn't been a focus yet in the Microsolidarity network. So building belonging, they're paying a lot more attention there.
Well, that's a cool opportunity too. That's as I am shaping, let's say, a coaching model around supporting people at the community level. Those principles of Jedi principles, justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, are something that I'm really looking at. Okay, let's build these in as central. I'm working with an organization called Holistic Underground that has a whole model for how do we train people on what's traditionally known as DEI work in a way that makes it irresistible, in a way that is really about supporting people to grow and make a contribution instead of the very typical getting shamed for not knowing or doing the right things. And I think any community work has to stand on a foundation of skills for justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, especially in the States, but I think anywhere. And so I'm going to be leading a book study starting in October of the core material from Holistic Underground. I've gotten the blessings from their executive director and training from him to bring it out into the world. So maybe there's a spot to do something with that in the Microsolidarity crew.
Yeah, definitely. I can be honest, like I'm a bit cagey about this stuff because so much of what's currently happening under the banner of justice and equity is coming from a whole theoretical framework that I think is fundamentally counterproductive. And so I absolutely agree with the stated aims, but the approach is just like, I don't have any confidence that it's going to deliver.
I'd be really curious to dig into that with you more, because it's like, I agree in a lot of ways. I think a lot of how it's been done is really unproductive at best sometimes, or counterproductive.
Yeah.
And interested in some new angles, because to me, there's no doubt that justice, equity, diversity, inclusion are important. And we need some new perspectives on how do we cultivate those practices and skills, for sure.
The short version is I published a newsletter a while ago called Meta-Modern Social Justice. So meta-modern being the phase that comes after postmodern. Postmodern being all of this deconstruction and pointing out what's wrong with stuff, and then meta-modern being constructive and saying, this is what we stand for, this is how we're getting there. And it's much more developmental and somatic and trauma informed. And so in there I've kind of pointed to, these are the people that I see mostly in the US that are pushing the social justice movement in that direction. Like, I think there is, especially on the somatic side of things, I think that's really warming up in a way that was huge. Completely invisible like 3 years ago. So that's really promising that people are attending to the embodied experience, rather than, like what I'm reacting against is like these spaces that I've been in where we kind of set people up to all be categorized as good people and bad people, and then it's just like priming the pump for conflict and polarization. And
absolutely,
it's like everyone gets really tense instead of what we need people to be is like tender and squishy,
Exactly. 100%. Because you're talking about somatics in this context, I take it you've read My Grandmother's Hands, or
I haven't, but my wife's read it and I picked up some by osmosis.
highly recommend. I guess I say that with full recognition that the American context is, I'm a different audience than you are for Resmo's work, I think. But really, really, really has been powerful, and perspective. Yeah, I'm with you. I want to make this work about growth and it being irresistible to create a future where we can all really thrive. And I think a perspective that I've heard more recently from a couple of people who I think are leading well on this is like setting aside the dichotomy of call in and call out and all the polarities that sets up to calling forth and acknowledging that people want to make a contribution, and how do we support them to grow to make the contribution that they're here to make, instead of shaming them for what skills they don't have yet, Anyway, I'm sure we can riff on that for a while.
I mean, I think shame is the key. It's the key emotion. It's like, how do we metabolize shame rather than adding more to the system?
Yep.
And it's like when we know that's what the mission is, it's actually quite achievable. Like there's a whole world of practice around that.
Yep. And I think it's like that's some of the support that's needed in our communities, because I think one of the biggest challenges that I've run into just on my own block is, all right, if we're gonna be in relationship together, we need to talk together, which means talking to neighbors. And there's a lot of shame and fear connected to just talking to neighbors.
Yeah.
And like overcoming the worries and doubts that are really natural that come along with that.
Yeah.
And I'm excited to see how to apply my coaching model and framework to supporting people to go past where they might normally stop themselves along those lines. Fundamentally, not just in like doing cool stuff, but being with each other in a way that's really powerful and empowering. Which reminds me that I wanted to chat with you a little bit too about coaching stuff in maybe our final minutes, to support you with that. So what questions do you have along those lines?
So because of my my backstory, what happened in my family of origin and all the rest,
which I've heard a little bit about on the on the podcast.
Great. I don't accept I don't really know how to gracefully accept authority outside of myself. So I'm not really interested in reading a lot of books and going to school and this kind of thing. And I have learned how to use my inner compass to steer me towards what's my contribution, and it's very effective. And I found in my life that I can just kind of pick up the 20% of a topic that gives me 80% of the skill, and I don't need to worry about the rest. So like with coaching, I've learned if I just bring a lot of presence, curiosity, questions, and myself, like my honest response, just be transparent and on the level with people, that, well, people are willing to keep coming back and paying me to spend time with me.
Yep.
Which is like a pretty obvious threshold of like, are they getting value or not? And all that I lack is, sometimes in a relationship, there's not like obvious chemistry, or sometimes they're facing a challenge that's like, I feel stumped or something, like nothing emerges. Those are moments where I'd love to be able to just pull a tool out and say like, oh, okay, well, why don't we try, we'll just run this process for the next 20 minutes and that might help you find clarity. So what I want from you, I think, is the 20%, the simplest stuff, the thing that it's not about developing some incredible depth over 10 years of practice. It's just like, no, it's this PDF where you go like step 1, step 2, step 3. Cool. Some of those things that have really made a difference for you.
Yeah, well,
by the way, I can go a little over time. I don't know.
I can too, about 10 minutes over. I think you already pointed to something that's really important that I just want to like acknowledge, which is I think 90, maybe 99% of coaching is the coach sees who they are, and the coach sees who the client is, such that when they're together, the client sees who they are, right, and is able to kind of settle in to some inner wisdom. The coaching model that I use and Jonas use is very much about people have their own answers, right? And it's not our job to do them. We might have some expertise, and we'll make some suggestions sometimes because it'll likely make it easier for them, right? But for the most part, it's about holding that space for their answers to come forth, right? And I have an article that I think is, let me see if I can find it. I'm just gonna, instead of taking time finding it, I'm just gonna write it down and I'll send it to you later.
Great.
So then most of coaching is not so much about a process, but the processes that are there are about helping my client contact their own voice of wisdom. Right.
Nice.
And so then it's not about like trying to come up with a process that's going to engineer it necessarily. And by the way, my degree is in electrical and computer engineering. I've been in the engineering space. I know how to engineer something, right? It's been my greatest lesson and challenge in coaching, is like breaking out of all the conditioning of an engineer to try to solve it and fix the problem for somebody else, and to just like, all right, I don't know what the answer is. What I do know is how to hold a space so that you can see what the answer is for you. The article I'm going to share with you gives a very simple way to tap into that voice of wisdom. And it really often comes down to helping people connect with who they are. And that might be about identifying a set of core values that you remind them of.
Right.
We have a practice in our coaching model called Standards of Integrity, which is about identifying integrity being wholeness, and standard being like a set of principles, a set of guidelines, right? Such that when you're demonstrating your standards of integrity, you are you're aligned with who you truly are, and your actions produce an experience of harmony and satisfaction and fulfillment and coherence, right? So then when you have some clarity of, okay, what are my like 8 to 12 standards of integrity that I can really look at this card? For example, I am ontological, loving, generous, savvy, playful, truthful, vulnerable, compassionate, joyous, present, supportive. And I know that these are mine because I see them in other people. I can check in with that and say, oh yeah, this is who I am. What would somebody with these standards of integrity have to say about the question that I'm bringing?
Right.
Which is great because it doesn't end run around the amygdala, right? It's like, no, we're not actually going to look at, okay, well, you have those standards of integrity, so what are you going to do? It's project that onto somebody else. Don't worry, it's not about you, it's about somebody else. What would they have to say about your question? I did this with a client yesterday, and it's like all the pretense, all the worry just kind of melted away. And they're like, oh yeah, this is the thing to do.
Great.
None of it being advice that came out of my mouth. So I'll say that, I wish I could give you that tool and give you a handout for this is how you guide people through standards of integrity, but it's...
I got it. This is good. What would somebody with your values do in this situation?
Cool.
And I know that prime them a little bit to get those values ahead of time. And
you can do whatever work, whatever process works for you. And I mean, that is really then the that gets to the heart of the whole coaching model that I use from this ontological coaching model. It's about how you're being in the world. And so when you're connected to who you are, who you're willing to be, then the monkey mind worry just kind of you can shift your attention more easily. And there's a lot of skills and a lot of practices and a lot of practice for like, okay, how do you as coach also know who you are so you can have your shit out of the way to be? But I know you've done a lot of that work, for yourself.
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
got
I feel good about that
so
stuff.
you're doing good stuff.
That's stuff that stuff that I got without needing a recipe, which is lucky. I mean, it would have been nice to have the recipe, it would have been more efficient, but
yeah,
that's how it goes.
There's that, and then there's another kind of fun article by the same author, who's just Maria Nemeth, who's the person who is the person behind the coaching model, and no longer the sole holder of it because she's 80 something and is in the process of passing it off to some other people, which is really great. But there's another article about how to train your brain from a place of anxiety and worry and doubt to being able to shift from those worries to what's most important to you, using gratitude as a practice. Interestingly, gratitude is just an easy way to do the training. It's not actually the point of it. But it's called the gratitude protocol. So I'll send that to you, which can be useful when like sometimes you want a client, you want to help them access that voice of wisdom. And the metaphor I use is it's like knocking on the house of your voice of wisdom. And you look at your values, and you knock on the door and say, okay, voice of wisdom, what do you have to say? And monkey mind, worry and doubt opens the door. And you might do that over and over and over again, and that's just what's in the space. So sometimes you need some practices to like soothe and calm down the amygdala, which is very often some brain training that needs to happen. So the other article is just a simple practice for building the muscle for that shift for people. Sometimes that's the most of what they need, at that moment. Anyway.
That's awesome. I mean, it's nice to know as well that gratitude stuff is pretty well verified by neuroscience as well, that just like looking for gratitude shifts your brain state. So that's a good reminder. And there's I think I'm naturally a very appreciative person, but some of my clients are not.
Well, it's so interesting, right? Because it's like Maria describes this in the article, but gratitude is something like your brain can't experience anxiety at the same time that you are looking for what you're grateful for. And that's the important operative point there, is it's actually not so important what it is that you're grateful for. It's putting your brain's attention on looking for what you're grateful for. And in that moment, the volume of the anxiety and the worry and the doubt turns down a little bit. And so if you can use gratitude to train your brain to say, okay, I am going to consider what I'm grateful for. The practice is really cool. It's like, look at write down 2 Post-it notes. 1 Post-it note, what you're anxious about. Second Post-it note, something you're grateful for. Look at the first Post-it note for 7 seconds, feel it, get into it, experience that anxiety, then shift what you're grateful for, 17 seconds. Just stay in that space, then go back to anxiety, then back to gratitude. Do that 3 times, and then set it down. And what of course happens for people is they say, oh my gosh, I felt so much better when I was looking at the gratitude. I want to do that all the time. And you say, no, you do this 3 times a day and only 3 times a day. There will be moments when you're saying, oh, let me do the gratitude thing because I'm feeling anxious. No, this is about telling your brain who's boss. So you're going to tell your brain, all right, brain, I hear you. We're going to think about this anxious thing later when we do the gratitude practice. We're not going to do the gratitude practice now, because that would just be like, getting out of trouble, right?
Just a fresh dopamine loop.
Yeah, exactly. So you're bringing intention, just using the gratitude to practice telling your brain where to look, because it's easy to look at gratitude when you're really doing it. So I love that.
That's awesome.
It's so useful.
This is great. This is exactly what I was looking for. Just the simple pieces.
Good.
We need to wrap up.
Yeah.
We have recorded this conversation and we haven't agreed what to do with it. I have a proposal. I would like to put it publicly on the internet, knowing that a very small number of people will watch it, and some of them may have just what you need and would reach out to you and connect. Do you consent?
Can I listen to it first?
Yes.
And then consent? Because I want to be really clear that, especially, and I might ask to cut out the bit of the coaching piece at the end here, because I want to be really clear that
Sure.
I'm above board with sharing details from the coaching model in the way
Yeah.
I think I am, but I want to hear it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was thinking I would love to have this published. So I think that would be
great. The motivation for me to publish is, I hope it helps you make good connections. And for me, it's like, I try not to repeat myself as much as possible. And so if I can have something to point other people to and say, oh, we had similar questions, go listen to that one and then talk to me. That helps a lot too.
I love it. Yeah, yes, and I'd love to listen to it if you can send it my way, and then
for sure,
we'll go from there. Cool.
Very good.
Thank you. This has been generative and rich, and I'm really grateful for just who you are and what you're doing in the world. I think it's been such a contribution to me, and I can tell for so many other people. And I hope to stay in touch.
Yeah. Well, hang out with us in Discord, and in a couple of months, let's have another call and see where you're at.
I love that.
Nice.
Great. All right, Rich. Have a great day or evening, as it may be.
Yeah. Time to stop.
Bye.